myself," said Poirot. "I understand nothing at all. And, as you perceive, it worries me." He sighed and bent over the little table examining the charred fragment of paper. He murmured to himself, "What I need at this moment is an old-fashioned woman's hat box." Dr. Constantine was at a loss to know what to make of this singular remark. In any case, Poirot gave him no time for questions. Opening the door into the corridor, he called for the conductor. The man arrived at a run. "How many women are there in this coach?" The conductor counted on his fingers. 1, 2, 3, 6, monsieur. The old American lady, a Swedish lady, the young English lady, the Countess Andreni, and Madame la Princess Dragomirov and her maid." Poirot considered. "They all have hat boxes, yes?" "Yes, monsieur." "Then bring me, let me see, yes, the Swedish lady's and that of the lady's maid. Those two are the only hope. You will tell them it is a customs regulation, anything that occurs to you." "That will be all right, monsieur. Neither lady is in her compartment at the moment." "Then be quick." The conductor departed. He returned with the two hat boxes. Poirot opened that of the maid, and tossed it aside. Then he opened the Swedish lady's and uttered an exclamation of satisfaction. Removing the hats carefully, he disclosed round humps of wire netting. "Ah, here is what we need. About 15 years ago hat boxes were made like this. You skewered through the hat with a hat pin onto this hump of wire netting." As he spoke he was skillfully removing two of the attached humps. Then he repacked the hat box and told the conductor to return both boxes where they belonged. When the door was shut once more he turned to his companion. "See you, my dear doctor, I am not one to rely upon the expert procedure. It is the psychology I seek, not the fingerprint or the cigarette ash. But in this case I would welcome a little scientific assistance. This compartment is full of clues, but can I be sure that those clues are really what they seem to be?" "I do not quite understand you, M. Poirot." "Well, to give you an example, we find a woman's handkerchief. Did a woman drop it? Or did a man, committing the crime, say to himself, 'I will make this look like a woman's crime. I will stab my enemy an unnecessary number of times, making some of the blows feeble and ineffective, and I will drop this handkerchief where no one can miss it'? That is one possibility. Then there is another. Did a woman kill him, and did she deliberately drop a pipe cleaner to make it look like a man's work? Or are we seriously to suppose that two people, a man and a woman, were separately concerned, and that each was so careless as to drop a clue to his or her identity? It is a little too much of a coincidence, that." "But where does the hat box come in?" asked the doctor, still puzzled. "Ah, I am coming to that. As I say, these clues, the watch stopped at 1:15, the handkerchief, the pipe cleaner, they may be genuine, or they may be faked. As to that I cannot yet tell. But there is one clue here which, though again I may be wrong, I believe has not been faked. I mean this flat match, M. Le Docteur. I believe that match was used by the murderer, not by Mr. Ratchet. It was used to burn an incriminating paper of some kind. Possibly a note. If so, there was something in that note, some mistake, some error, that left a possible clue to the assailant. I am going to try to discover what that something was." He went out of the compartment and returned a few moments later with a small spirit stove and a pair of curling tongs. "I use them for the moustaches," he said, referring to the latter. The doctor watched him with great interest. Poirot flattened out the two humps of wire, and with great care wriggled the charred scrap of paper onto one of them. He clapped the other on top of it and then, holding both pieces together with the tongs, held the whole thing over the flame of the spirit lamp. "It is a very makeshift affair, this," he said over his shoulder. "Let us hope that it will answer our purpose." The doctor watched the proceedings attentively. The metal began to glow. Suddenly he saw faint indications of letters. Words formed themselves slowly, words of fire. It was a very tiny scrap. Only 3 words and part of another showed. "Remember little Daisy Armstrong?" "Ah!" Poirot gave a sharp exclamation. "It tells you something?" asked the doctor. Poirot's eyes were shining. He laid down the tongs carefully. "Yes," he said. I know the dead man's real name. I know why he had to leave America. What was his name? Cassetti. Cassetti? Constantine knitted his brows. It brings back to me something. Some years ago. I cannot remember. It was a case in America, was it not? Yes, said Poirot. A case in America. Further than that, Poirot was not disposed to be communicative. He looked round him as he went on. We will go into all that presently. Let us first make sure that we have seen all there is to be seen here. Quickly and deftly he went once more through the pockets of the dead man's clothes but found nothing there of interest. He tried the communicating door which led through to the next compartment, but it was bolted on the other side. There is one thing that I do not understand, said Dr. Constantine. If the murderer did not escape through the window, and if this communicating door was bolted on the other side, and if the door into the corridor was not only locked on the inside but chained, how then did the murderer leave the compartment? That is what the audience says when a person bound hand and foot is shut into a cabinet and disappears. You mean? I mean, explained Poirot, that if the murderer intended us to believe that he had escaped by way of the window, he would naturally make it appear that the other two exits were impossible. Like the disappearing person in the cabinet, it is a trick. It is our business to find out how the trick is done. He locked the communicating door on their side in case, he said, the excellent Mrs. Hubbard should take it into her head to acquire first-hand details of the crime to write to her daughter. He looked round once more. There is nothing more to do here, I think. Let us rejoin M. Book. Murder on the Orient Express. 8. The Armstrong Kidnapping Case. They found M. Book finishing an omelette. I thought it best to have lunch served immediately in the restaurant car, he said. Afterwards it will be cleared and M. Poirot can conduct his examination of the passengers there. In the meantime I have ordered them to bring us some food here. An excellent idea, said Poirot. None of the three men was hungry, and the meal was soon eaten, but not till they were sipping their coffee did M. Book mention the subject that was occupying all their minds. Eh bien? He asked. Eh bien, I have discovered the identity of the victim. I know why it was imperative he should leave America. Who was he? Do you remember reading of the Armstrong baby? This is the man who murdered little Daisy Armstrong. Cassetti. I recall it now. A shocking affair, though I cannot remember the details. Colonel Armstrong was an Englishman, AVC. He was half American, his mother having been a daughter of W.K. Van der Holt, the Wall Street millionaire. He married the daughter of Linda Warden, the most famous tragic American actress of her day. They lived in America and had one child, a girl whom they idolized. When she was 3 years old she was kidnapped, and an impossibly high sum demanded as the price of her return. I will not weary you with all the intricacies that followed. I will come to the moment when, after the parents had paid over the enormous sum of $200,000, the child's dead body was discovered. It had been dead for at least a fortnight. Public indignation rose to fever point. And there was worse to follow. Mrs. Armstrong was expecting another baby. Following the shock of the discovery, she gave birth prematurely to a dead child, and herself died. Her broken-hearted husband shot himself. Mon Dieu, what a tragedy. I remember now, said M. Book. There was also another death, if I remember rightly? Yes, an unfortunate French or Swiss nursemaid. The police were convinced that she had some knowledge of the crime. They refused to believe her hysterical denials. Finally, in a fit of despair, the poor girl threw herself from a window and was killed. It was proved afterwards that she had been absolutely innocent of any complicity in the crime. It is not good to think of, said M. Book. About 6 months later, this man Cassetti was arrested as the head of the gang who had kidnapped the child. They had used the same methods in the past. If the police seemed likely to get on their trail, they killed their prisoner, hid the body, and continued to extract as much money as possible before the crime was discovered. Now, I will make clear to you this, my friend. Cassetti was the man. But by means of the enormous wealth he had piled up, and owing to the secret hold he had over various persons, he was acquitted on some technical inaccuracy. Notwithstanding that, he would have been lynched by the populace had he not been clever enough to give them the slip. It is now clear to me what happened. He changed his name and left America. Since then he has been a gentleman of leisure, traveling abroad and living on his rent. Ah! Kill animal. M. Book's tone was redolent of heartfelt disgust. I cannot regret that he is dead, not at all. I agree with you. Tout de même, it is not necessary that he should be killed on the Orient Express. There are other places. Poirot smiled a little. He realized that M. Book was biased in the matter. The question we have now to ask ourselves is this, he said. Is this murder the work of some rival gang whom Cassetti had double-crossed in the past, or is it an act of private vengeance? He explained his discovery of the few words on the charred fragment of paper. If I am right in my assumption, then, the letter was burnt by the murderer. Why? Because it mentioned the name Armstrong, which is the clue to the mystery. Are there any members of the Armstrong family living? That, unfortunately, I do not know. I think I remember reading of a younger sister of Mrs. Armstrong's. Poirot went on to relate the joint conclusions of himself and Dr. Constantine. M. Book brightened at the mention of the broken watch. That seems to give us the time of the crime very exactly. Yes, said Poirot. It is very convenient. There was an indescribable something in his tone that made both the other two look at him curiously. You say that you yourself heard Ratchet speak to the conductor at 20 minutes to 1? Asked M. Book. Poirot related just what had occurred. Well, said M. Book, that proves at least that Cassetti or Ratchet, as I shall continue to call him, was certainly alive at 20 minutes to 1. 23 minutes to 1, to be precise. Then at 12:37, to put it formally, Mr. Ratchet was alive. That is in fact, at least. Poirot did not reply. He sat looking thoughtfully in front of him. There was a tap on the door and the restaurant attendant entered. The restaurant car is free now, monsieur, he said. We will go there, said M. Book, rising. I may accompany you? Asked Constantine. Certainly, my dear doctor. Unless M. Poirot has any objection? Not at all. Not at all, said Poirot. After a little politeness in the matter of precedence apes vouse, monsieur, may I's non, apes vouse, they left the compartment. Murder on the Orient Express. Part 2. The evidence. Murder on the Orient Express. 1. The evidence of the wagonlet conductor. In the restaurant car all was in readiness. Poirot and M. Book sat together on one side of a table. The doctor sat across the aisle. On the table in front of Poirot was a plan of the Istanbul-Calais coach with the names of the passengers marked in red ink. The passports and tickets were in a pile at one side. There was writing paper, ink, pen, and pencils. Excellent, said Poirot. We can open our court of inquiry without more ado. First, I think, we should take the evidence of the wagonlet conductor. You probably know something about the man. What character has he? Is he a man on whose word you would place reliance? I should say so, most assuredly. Pierre Michel has been employed by the company for over 15 years. He is a Frenchman, lives near Calais. Thoroughly respectable and honest. Not, perhaps, remarkable for brains. Poirot nodded comprehendingly. Good, he said. Let us see him. Pierre Michel had recovered some of his assurance, but he was still extremely nervous. I hope monsieur will not think that there has been any negligence on my part, he said anxiously, his eyes going from Poirot to M. Book. It is a terrible thing that has happened. I hope monsieur does not think that it reflects on me in any way. Having soothed the man's fears, Poirot began his questions. He first elicited Michel's name and address, his length of service, and the length of time he had been on this particular route. These particulars he already knew, but the routine questions served to put the man at his ease. And now, went on Poirot, let us come to the events of last night. M. Ratchet retired to bed when? Almost immediately after dinner, monsieur. Actually before we left Belgrade. So he did on the previous night. He had directed me to make up the bed while he was at dinner, and I did so. Did anybody go into his compartment afterwards? His valet, monsieur, and the young American gentleman, his secretary. Anyone else? No, monsieur, not that I know of. Good. And that is the last you saw or heard of him? No, monsieur. You forget he rang his bell about 20 to 1 soon after we had stopped. What happened exactly? I knocked at the door, but he called out and said he had made a mistake. In English or in French? In French. What were his words exactly? Snestron. Je me suis trompé. Quite right, said Poirot. That is what I heard. And then you went away? Yes, monsieur. Did you go back to your seat? No, monsieur, I went first to answer another bell that had just rung. Now, Michel, I am going to ask you an important question. Where were you at 1:15? Monsieur. I was at my little seat at the end facing up the corridor. You are sure? May I zoo at least? I went into the next coach, the Athens coach, to speak to my colleague there. We spoke about the snow. That was at some time soon after 1 o'clock. I cannot say exactly. And you returned when? One of my bells rang, monsieur. I remember I told you. It was the American lady. She had rung several times. I recollect, said Poirot. And after that? After that, monsieur. I answered your bell and brought you some mineral water. Then, about half an hour later, I made up the bed in one of the other compartments, that of the young American gentleman, Mr. Ratchett's secretary. Was Mr. McQueen alone in his compartment when you went to make up his bed? The English colonel from number 15 was with him. They had been sitting talking. What did the colonel do when he left Mr. McQueen? He went back to his own compartment. Number 15, that is quite close to your seat, is it not? Yes, monsieur, it is the second compartment from that end of the corridor. His bed was already made up? Yes, monsieur. I had made it up while he was at dinner. What time was all this? I could not say exactly, monsieur. Not later than 2 o'clock certainly. And after that? After that, monsieur, I sat in my seat till morning. You did not go again into the Athens coach? No, monsieur. Perhaps you slept? I do not think so, monsieur. The train being at a standstill prevented me from dozing off as I usually do. Did you see any of the passengers moving up or down the corridor? The man reflected. One of the ladies went to the toilet at the far end, I think. Which lady? I do not know, monsieur. It was far down the corridor and she had her back to me. She had on a kimono of scarlet with dragons on it. Poirot nodded. And after that? Nothing, monsieur, until the morning. You are sure? Ah, pardon you yourself, monsieur, opened your door and looked out for a second. Good, my friend, said Poirot. I wondered whether you would remember that. By the way, I was awakened by what sounded like something heavy falling against my door. Have you any idea what that could have been? The man stared at him. There was nothing, monsieur. Nothing, I am positive of it. Then I must have had the corkema, said Poirot philosophically. Unless, put in M. Book, it was something in the compartment next door that you heard. Poirot took no notice of the suggestion. Perhaps he did not wish to before the wagonlet conductor. Let us pass to another point, he said. Supposing that last night an assassin joined the train. Is it quite certain that he could not have left it after committing the crime? Pierre Michel shook his head. Nor that he can be concealed on it somewhere. It has been well searched, said M. Book. Abandon that idea, my friend. Besides, said Michel, no one could get onto the sleeping car without my seeing them. When was the last stop? Vinkovci. What time was that? We should have left there at 11:58, but owing to the weather we were 20 minutes late. Someone might have come along from the ordinary part of the train? No, monsieur. After the service of dinner, the door between the ordinary carriages and the sleeping cars is locked. Did you yourself descend from the train at Vinkovci? Yes, monsieur. I got down onto the platform as usual and stood by the step up into the train. The other conductors did the same. What about the forward door, the one near the restaurant car? It is always fastened on the inside. It is not so fastened now. The man looked surprised, then his face cleared. Doubtless one of the passengers opened it to look out on the snow. Probably, said Poirot. He tapped thoughtfully on the table for a minute or two. Monsieur does not blame me, said the man timidly. Poirot smiled on him kindly. You have had the evil chance, my friend, he said. Ah! One other point while I remember it. You said that another bell rang just as you were knocking at Ratchet's door. In fact, I heard it myself. Whose was it? It was the bell of Madame la Princess Dragomiroff. She desired me to summon her maid. And you did so? Yes, monsieur. Poirot studied the plan in front of him thoughtfully. Then he inclined his head. That is all, he said, for the moment. Thank you, monsieur. The man rose. He looked at Book. Do not distress yourself, said the latter kindly. I cannot see that there has been any negligence on your part. Gratified, Pierre Michel left the compartment. Murder on the Orient Express. 2. The evidence of the secretary. For a minute or two Poirot remained lost in thought. I think, he said at last, that it would be well to have a further word with Mr. McQueen, in view of what we now know. The young American appeared promptly. Well, he said, how are things going? Not too badly. Since our last conversation, I have learnt something: the identity of Mr. Ratchet. Hector McQueen leaned forward interestedly. Yes? He said. Ratchet, as you suspected, was merely an alias. The man Ratchet was Cassetti, who ran the celebrated kidnapping stunts, including the famous affair of little Daisy Armstrong. An expression of utter astonishment appeared on McQueen's face. Then it darkened. The damned skunk! He exclaimed. You had no idea of this, Mr. McQueen? No, sir, said the young American decidedly. If I had, I'd have cut off my right hand before it had a chance to do secretarial work for him. You feel strongly about the matter, Mr. McQueen? I have a particular reason for doing so. My father was the district attorney who handled the case, Mr. Poirot. I saw Mrs. Armstrong more than once. She was a lovely woman. So gentle and heartbroken. His face darkened. If ever a man deserved what he got, Ratchet or Cassetti is the man. I'm rejoiced at his end. Such a man wasn't fit to live. You almost feel as though you would have been willing to do the good deed yourself? I do. He paused, then added rather guiltily, seems I'm kind of incriminating myself. I should be more inclined to suspect you, Mr. McQueen, if you displayed an inordinate sorrow at your employer's decease. I don't think I could do that even to save myself from the chair, said McQueen grimly. Then he added, if I'm not being unduly curious, just how did you figure this out? Cassetti's identity, I mean. By a fragment of a letter found in his compartment. But surely that was rather careless of the old man? That depends, said Poirot, on the point of view. The young man seemed to find this remark rather baffling. He stared at Poirot as though trying to make him out. The task before me, said Poirot, is to make sure of the movements of everyone on the train. No offense need be taken, you understand. It is only a matter of routine. Sure. Get right on with it and let me clear my character if I can. I need hardly ask you the number of your compartment, said Poirot, smiling, since I shared it with you for a night. It is the second-class compartment nos. 6 and 7, and after my departure you had it to yourself. That's right. Now, Mr. McQueen, I want you to describe your movements last night from the time of leaving the dining car. That's quite easy. I went back to my compartment, read a bit, got out on the platform at Belgrade, decided it was too cold, and got in again. I talked for a while to a young English lady who is in the compartment next to mine. Then I fell into conversation with that Englishman, Colonel Arbuthnot. As a matter of fact, I think you passed us as we were talking. Then I went into Mr. Ratchet and, as I told you, took down some memoranda of letters he wanted written. I said good night to him and left him. Colonel Arbuthnot was still standing in the corridor. His compartment was already made up for the night, so I suggested that he should come along to mine. I ordered a couple of drinks and we got right down to it. Discussed world politics and the government of India and our own troubles with prohibition and the Wall Street crisis. I don't as a rule cotton to British as they're a stiff-necked lot, but I liked this one. Do you know what time it was when he left you? Pretty late. Nearly 2 o'clock, I should say. You noticed that the train had stopped? Oh, yes. We wondered a bit. Looked out and saw the snow lying very thick, but we didn't think it was serious. What happened when Colonel Arbuthnot finally said good night? He went along to his compartment and I called to the conductor to make up my bed. Where were you whilst he was making it? Standing just outside the door in the corridor smoking a cigarette. And then? And then I went to bed and slept till morning. During the evening did you leave the train at all? Arbuthnot and I thought we'd get out at what was the name of the place ? Vinkovci to stretch our legs a bit. But it was bitterly cold, a blizzard on. We soon hopped back again. By which door did you leave the train? By the one nearest to our compartment. The one next to the dining car? Yes. Do you remember if it was bolted? McQueen considered. Why, yes, I seem to remember it was. At least there was a kind of bar that fitted across the handle. Is that what you mean? Yes. On getting back into the train did you replace that bar? Why, no, I don't think I did. I got in last. No, I don't seem to remember doing so. He added suddenly, is that an important point? It may be. Now, I presume, monsieur, that while you and Colonel Arbuthnot were sitting talking the door of your compartment into the corridor was open? Hector McQueen nodded. I want you, if you can, to tell me if anyone passed along that corridor after the train left Vinkovci up to the time you parted company for the night. McQueen drew his brows together. I think the conductor passed along once, he said, coming from the direction of the dining car. And a woman passed the other way, going towards it. Which woman? I couldn't say. I didn't really notice. You see, I was arguing a point with Arbuthnot. I just seem to remember a glimpse of some scarlet silk affair passing the door. I didn't look, and anyway I wouldn't have seen the person's face. As you know, my carriage faces the dining car end of the train, so a woman going along the corridor in that direction would have her back to me as soon as she'd passed. Poirot nodded. She was going to the toilet, I presume? I suppose so. And you saw her return? Well, no, now that you mention it, I didn't notice her returning, but I suppose she must have done so. One more question. Do you smoke a pipe, Mr. McQueen? No, sir, I do not. Poirot paused a moment. I think that is all at present. I should now like to see the valet of Mr. Ratchet. By the way, did both you and he always travel second class? He did. But I usually went first if possible in the compartment adjoining Mr. Ratchet's. Then he had most of his baggage put in my compartment and yet could get at both it and me easily whenever he chose. But on this occasion all the first-class berths were booked except the one that he took. I comprehend. Thank you, Mr. McQueen. Murder on the Orient Express. 3. The evidence of the valet. The American was succeeded by the pale Englishman with the inexpressive face whom Poirot had already noticed on the day before. He stood waiting very correctly. Poirot motioned to him to sit down. You are, I understand, the valet of M. Ratchet. Yes, sir. Your name? Edward Henry Masterman. Your age? 39. And your home address? 21 Friar Street, Clerkenwell. You have heard that your master has been murdered? Yes, sir. A very shocking occurrence. Will you now tell me, please, at what hour you last saw M. Ratchet? The valet considered. It must have been about 9 o'clock, sir, last night. That or a little after. Tell me in your own words exactly what happened. I went into Mr. Ratchet as usual, sir, and attended to his wants. What were your duties exactly? to fold or hang up his clothes, sir, put his dental plate in water and see that he had everything he wanted for the night. Was his manner much the same as usual? The valet considered a moment. Well, sir, I think he was upset. In what way upset? Over a letter he'd been reading. He asked me if it was I who had put it in his compartment. Of course I told him I hadn't done any such thing, but he swore at me and found fault with everything I did. Was that unusual? Oh, no, sir. He lost his temper easily, as I say, it just depended what had happened to upset him. Did your master ever take a sleeping draught? Dr. Constantine leaned forward a little. Always when traveling by train, sir. He said he couldn't sleep otherwise. Do you know what drug he was in the habit of taking? I couldn't say, I'm sure, sir. There was no name on the bottle, just the sleeping draught to be taken at bedtime. Did he take it last night? Yes, sir. I poured it into a glass and put it on top of the toilet table ready for him. You didn't actually see him drink it? No, sir. What happened next? I asked if there was anything further, and also asked what time he would like to be called in the morning. He said he didn't want to be disturbed till he rang. Was that usual? Quite usual, sir. When he was ready to get up he used to ring the bell for the conductor and then send him for me. Was he usually an early or a late riser? It depended, sir, on his mood. Sometimes he'd get up for breakfast, sometimes he wouldn't get up till just on lunchtime. So that you weren't alarmed when the morning wore on and no summons came? No, sir. Did you know that your master had enemies? Yes, sir. The man spoke quite unemotionally. How did you know? I had heard him discussing some letters, sir, with Mr. McQueen. Had you an affection for your employer, Masterman? Masterman's face became, if possible, even more inexpressive than it was normally. I should hardly like to say that, sir. He was a generous employer. But you didn't like him? Shall we put it that I don't care very much for Americans, sir? Have you ever been in America? No, sir. Do you remember reading in the paper of the Armstrong kidnapping case? A little color came into the man's cheeks. Yes, indeed, sir. A little baby girl. Wasn't it? A very shocking affair. Did you know that your employer, Mr. Adgett, was the principal instigator in that affair? No, indeed, sir. The valet's tone held positive warmth and feeling for the first time. I can hardly believe it, sir. Nevertheless, it is true. Now, to pass to your own movements last night. A matter of routine, you understand. What did you do after leaving your master? I told Mr. McQueen, sir, that the master wanted him. Then I went to my own compartment and read. Your compartment was the end second class one, sir. Next to the dining car. Poirot was looking at his plan. I see, and you had which berth? The lower one, sir. That is number 4? Yes, sir. Is there anyone in with you? Yes, sir. A big Italian fellow. Does he speak English? Well, a kind of English, sir. The valet's tone was deprecating. He's been in America, Chicago, I understand. Do you and he talk together much? No, sir. I prefer to read. Poirot smiled. He could visualize the scene: the large, voluble Italian, and the snub-direct administered by the gentleman's gentleman. And what, may I ask, are you reading? He inquired. At present, sir, I am reading Love's Captive, by Mrs. Arabella Richardson. A good story? I find it highly enjoyable, sir. Well, let us continue. You return to your compartment and read Love's Captive till when? At about 10:30, sir. This Italian wanted to go to bed. So the conductor came and made the beds up. And then you went to bed and to sleep. I went to bed, sir, but I didn't sleep. Why didn't you sleep? I had the toothache, sir. Oh, Lila, that is painful. Most painful, sir. Did you do anything for it? I applied a little oil of cloves, sir, which relieved the pain a little, but I was still not able to get to sleep. I turned the light on above my head and continued to read to take my mind off, as it were. And did you not go to sleep at all? Yes, sir, I dropped off about 4 in the morning. And your companion? The Italian fellow? Oh, he just snored. He did not leave the compartment at all during the night? No, sir. Did you? No, sir. Did you hear anything during the night? I don't think so, sir. Nothing unusual, I mean. The train being at a standstill made it all very quiet. Poirot was silent a moment or two. Then he spoke. Well, I think there is very little more to be said. You cannot throw any light upon the tragedy? I'm afraid not. I'm sorry, sir. As far as you know, was there any quarrel or bad blood between your master and Mr. McQueen? Oh. No, sir. Mr. McQueen was a very pleasant gentleman. Where were you in service before you came to Mr. Ratchet? With Sir Henry Tomlinson, sir, in Grosvenor Square. Why did you leave him? He was going to East Africa, sir, and did not require my services any longer. But I am sure he will speak for me, sir. I was with him some years. And you have been with Mr. Ratchet how long? Just over 9 months, sir. Thank you, Masterman. By the way, are you a pipe smoker? No, sir. I only smoke cigarettes, Gaspers, sir. Thank you, that will do. Poirot gave him a nod of dismissal. The valet hesitated a moment. You'll excuse me, sir, but the elderly American lady is in what I might describe as a state, sir. She's saying she knows all about the murderer. She's in a very excitable condition, sir. In that case, said Poirot, smiling, we had better see her next. Shall I tell her, sir? She's been demanding to see someone in authority for a long time. The conductor's been trying to pacify her. Send her to us, my friend, said Poirot. We will listen to her story now. Murder on the Orient Express. 4. The evidence of the American lady. Mrs. Hubbard arrived in the dining car in such a state of breathless excitement that she was hardly able to articulate her words. Now just tell me this: who's in authority here? I've got some very important information, very important indeed, and I'm going to tell it to someone in authority just as soon as I can. If you gentlemen. Her wavering glance fluctuated between the 3 men. Poirot leaned forward. Tell it to me, madam, he said. But first, pray be seated. Mrs. Hubbard plumped heavily down onto the seat opposite to him. What I've got to tell you is just this. There was a murder on the train last night, and the murderer was right there in my compartment. She paused to give dramatic emphasis to her words. You are sure of this, madam? Of course I'm sure. The idea. I know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you everything there is to tell. I'd gotten into bed and gone to sleep, and suddenly I woke up. Everything was dark and I knew there was a man in my compartment. I was just so scared I couldn't scream, if you know what I mean. I just lay there and thought, mercy, I'm going to be killed. I just can't describe to you how I felt. These nasty trains, I thought, and all the outrages I'd read of. And I thought, well, anyway, he won't get my jewelry because, you see, I'd put that in a stocking and hidden it under my pillow, which isn't any too comfortable, by the way, kinda bumpy, if you know what I mean. But that's neither here nor there. Where was I? You realized, madam, that there was a man in your compartment. Yes, well, I just lay there with my eyes closed, and wondered what I'd do. And I thought, well, I'm just thankful that my daughter doesn't know the plight I'm in. And then, somehow, I got my wits about me and I felt about with my hand and I pressed the bell for the conductor. I pressed it and I pressed it, but nothing happened, and I can tell you, I thought my heart was going to stop beating. Mercy, I said to myself, maybe they've murdered every single soul on the train. It was at a standstill anyhow and there was a nasty quiet feel in the air. But I just went on pressing that bell and oh, the relief when I heard footsteps coming running down the corridor and a knock on the door. Come in, I screamed, and I switched on the lights at the same time. And would you believe it, there wasn't a soul there. This seemed to Mrs. Hubbard to be a dramatic climax rather than an anticlimax. "And what happened next, madam?" "Why, I told the man what had happened and he didn't seem to believe me. Seemed to imagine I'd dreamed the whole thing. I made him look under the seat, though he said there wasn't room for a man to squeeze himself in there. It was plain enough that the man had got away, but there had been a man there, and it just made me mad the way the conductor tried to soothe me down. I'm not one to imagine things, mister. I don't think I know your name." "Poirot, madam, and this is M. Book, a director of the company, and Dr. Constantine." Mrs. Hubbard murmured, "Pleased to meet you, I'm sure," to all three of them in an abstracted manner, and then plunged once more into her recital. "Now I'm just not going to pretend I was as bright as I might have been. I got it into my head that it was the man from next door, the poor fellow who's been killed. I told the conductor to look at the door between the compartments, and sure enough it wasn't bolted. Well, I soon saw to that. I told him to bolt it then and there, and after he'd gone out I got up and put a suitcase against it to make sure." "What time was this, Mrs. Hubbard?" "Well, I'm sure I can't tell you. I never looked to see. I was so upset." "And what is your theory now?" "Why, I should say it was just as plain could be. The man in my compartment was the murderer. Who else could he be?" "And you think he went back into the adjoining compartment?" "How do I know where he went? I had my eyes tight shut." "He might have slipped out through the door into the corridor." "Well, I couldn't say. You see, I had my eyes tight shut." Mrs. Hubbard sighed convulsively. "Mercy, I was scared. If my daughter only knew." "You do not think, madam, that what you heard was the noise of someone moving about next door in the murdered man's compartment?" "No, I do not, Mr. What is it? Poirot. The man was right there in the same compartment with me. And what's more, I've got proof of it." Triumphantly, she hauled a large handbag into view and proceeded to burrow in its interior. She took out in turn 2 large clean handkerchiefs, a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, a bottle of aspirin, a packet of Glauber's salts, a celluloid tube of bright green peppermints, a bunch of keys, a pair of scissors, a book of American Express checks, a snapshot of an extraordinarily plain-looking child, some letters, 5 strings of pseudo-oriental beads, and a small metal object, a button. "You see this button? Well, it's not one of me buttons. It's not off anything I've got. I found it this morning when I got up." As she placed it on the table, M. Book leaned forward and gave an exclamation. "But this is a button from the tunic of a wagon-lit attendant." "There may be a natural explanation for that," said Poirot. He turned gently to the lady. "This button, madam, may have dropped from the conductor's uniform, either when he searched your cabin or when he was making the bed up last night. I just don't know what's the matter with all you people. Seems as though you don't want to do anything but make objections. Now listen here. I was reading a magazine last night before I went to sleep. Before I turned the light out, I placed that magazine on a little case that was standing on the floor near the window. Have you got that?" They assured her that they had. "Very well then." The conductor looked under the seat from near the door, and then he came in and bolted the door between me and the next compartment, but he never went near the window. Well, this morning that button was lying right on top of the magazine. What do you call that, I should like to know?" "That, madam, I call evidence," said Poirot. The answer seemed to appease the lady. "It makes me madder than a hornet to be disbelieved," she explained. "You have given us most interesting and valuable evidence," said Poirot soothingly. "Now may I ask you a few questions?" "Why, certainly." "How was it, since you were nervous of this man Radgett, that you hadn't already bolted the door between the compartments?" "I had," returned Mrs. Hubbard promptly. "Oh, you had? Well, as a matter of fact I asked that Swedish creature, a pleasant soul, if it was bolted, and she said it was." "How was it you couldn't see for yourself?" "Because I was in bed and my spongy bag was hanging on the door handle." "What time was it when you asked her to do this for you?" "Now let me think. It must have been round about 10:30 or 11:15. She'd come along to see if I had an aspirin. I told her where to find it and she got it out of my grip. You yourself were in bed? Yes. Suddenly she laughed. Poor soul, she was so upset. You see, she'd